Hello everybody, my name is Dalek Rock. You might have seen me running around Cyrodiil with my Clannfear over here. I thought it was about time that I made a video about my build because I've been getting a few questions about it over the years, and there's only so much that I can explain over text without showing my screen also, so that's pretty much what this is going to be about, so let's get started. First thing that people usually ask me is if I'm a heavy armor Sorc, and the answer is no. I've been using light armor for a really long time now. Ever since 1 Tamriel, I've been using 5 Necropotents, 5 Lich with 2 Lich on the back bar, and the Lightning Master Staff on the front bar. The monster sets, right now I'm using Maw the Infernal, but sometimes, very rarely, I'll swap it out for Scoria or Shadowrend, depending on if I want to do something specific. But for all intents and purposes, I stick with Maw the Infernal. Trait-wise, it's fairly traditional. The head, chest, and leg pieces are all infused, and the smaller pieces are all divines, except for the sash, because the sash dropped in Impen back in Shadows of the Hiss, and I never bothered to trait change it just because I got used to having the Impen piece. And my sword and board is also Impen, so those are the only 2 Impen pieces that I have active. The jewelry is all arcane, but probably could have guessed that. The lightning staff is sharpened just to keep that penetration up, and the sword, right now it's Nern, but ideally it would be powered. But since I trade it between my Sorc and my DK, I just keep it in Nern so that I don't have to worry about missing out on damage on my DK. The heal that it provides in powered for my Sorc is, I mean, it's small enough that I can ignore it, but ideally it would be powered. Enchantments, the body pieces are all tri-stat. I did that fairly recently so that my max health and my max stam would go up. I didn't really feel like I needed to go over 40k magicka. My monster helms, I keep solid magicka just because I don't really feel the need to invest tri-stats in those. My jewelry all has spell damage enchants. I have a shock damage enchant on my lightning staff so that implosion will have a higher chance to proc with every time it procs. And my sword, I use the spell damage enchant because when I'm on my back bar, sometimes I'll give a little light attack to the person that I'm attacking. And my shield has a health enchant because the Clannfear, I usually swap to my back bar to enter turtle mode, basically. And since my health goes up on my back bar, the Clannfear heal is stronger. With consumables, I use Witch Mothers because it's very important to keep the regen up, the regen high, because if I'm being pressured, having 1600 regen, which is what it would be if I didn't have this, having 1600 regen is very detrimental. And since Lich also stacks with this, it's very important to keep the regen as high as possible while also keeping up your defenses and your offense. Potion wise, I have the Essence of Spell Crit, mostly for the health and magicka bonuses, but I use this instead of Tri-Stat, because I'm an Argonian and the stamina recovered from having this it's basically a Dark Deal cast, which is enough to get me into breaking free cost. But I prefer using the crit because I use Surge, and the higher crit leads to more heals from Surge. Very rarely I'll use the Essence of Lingering Health. It's mostly to use against high dot builds, like Mag DKs and Stam Wardens, stuff like that. But most of the time, actually pretty much all the time, I stick to this, and this is just my suicide pod. So for the skills, this is the setup that I've found the most useful for me. It might not necessarily be good for anybody that tries this out, but for me and my playstyle, this is what's been ideal for me the past few years. I've got Haunting Curse, which is pretty typical. I've got Clench, which I'll explain in a second. I've got Frags, I've got Tomb, the Clannfear, and Dawnbreaker's Smiting. The reason that I use Clench instead of Reach is because since I use Tomb and Dawnbreaker, I want to try to force myself to get into melee range of pretty much everybody. And it also gets me feeling very comfortable to be in melee range of melee players as a ranged class. So I don't feel very uncomfortable when people come into my private space by using Stampede or anything. So basically I'll just use Clench, knock someone down to the ground, and drop Tomb on top of them, and by that point, usually Curse ends up blowing up, and then I'll drop a Dawnbreaker on them. And assuming that all of that lands and a few of them crit, it should drop their health quite a bit, and then from there I can just keep on attacking and hopefully finish them off. And if not, then I can just do the whole rotation over again. The back bar is a very special thing to me. It's entirely dedicated to survival. So I've got Surge, Boundless, Ball of Lightning, Dark Deal, and the Clannfear again. And a new addition to it is Spell Wall instead of Bats. Surge is mostly for the Major Sorcery, but the heal over time is pretty important also because in certain easier fights, it can often carry you the entire way without you having to cast the Clannfear heal all too often. Boundless is pretty important because armor on a wordless build is pretty damn important to keep that up. The damage from it also helps Surge proc more often. And back to the front bar, since I'm always in melee range, or mostly in melee range, Boundless ticks fairly often. Ball of Lightning was originally slotted to prevent Crushing Shock and Frags. Frags was a pretty big culprit in my early deaths because of its knockdown, but now, it's not. I mostly use it for creating a gap so that I can get behind a tree or get behind a rock to recast the Clannfear or use Dark Deal or whatever. Dark Deal is, of course, the stamina. Since I use a shield sword and board, I'm going to be blocking a lot for that damage reduction, and that comes at a stamina cost. So I use Dark Deal to restore the stamina that I use from blocking and dodge rolling and all that stuff. And then the Clannfear, I didn't explain this on the last bar. The Clannfear heals for 35% of your max health. So that's how come I end up having a health enchant on my back bar. So on my back bar, it goes up to 29.5k. On my front bar, it's only 28k. The difference in the heal isn't that much. It's about 300, but over 10 casts, that 300 becomes 3k. So, every little bit helps. That's how come I'd really prefer having powered on my sword. But, yeah, Spell Wall, moving on. Spell Wall, I slotted Spell Wall instead of Bats because the problem, I liked Bats in high pressure situations, but I didn't like the fact that I had to be in a high pressure situation for it to be effective. Since it heals based on each enemy that it hits, if I was trying to run away from people, Bats would be pretty much useless because I'm trying to get away from the crowd, not go into it. So that's how come I put on Spell Wall. It just allowed me to passively block without using up any of my stamina, and I didn't have to worry about most CCs. Sometimes I still get a fear here and there, but most of the time, things like Reach, Clench, Javelin, those are all just reflected back to whoever shot it at me. So that's how come I ended up slotting Spell Wall instead of Bats. here on the character menu, you can see that I've got 64 attributes into Magicka, as pretty much everybody does. And full vampirism, not stage 1, 2, or 3, full vampirism with the Atronach for that juicy Magicka recovery. The goal of the CP allocation was to make my life a little bit easier with regards to stamina costs and healing myself. So I've got 56 into quick recovery, which is just all the healing that I receive. 0 into Bastion, of course. 49 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. That covers pretty much all the damage that you'll ever take. 18 into Thick Skinned. It's probably not a great idea this patch, but I don't want to respec all my CP just for whatever the meta is. I'd rather just keep it the way that it is right now because it's fairly balanced against all other things. I've got 64 into Resistant because I've only got those 2 in-pen pieces, so this comes up to 1433 total, and that brings my complete total up to 1949. I've got 34 into Ironclad, which is also damage reduction. Nothing into the Ritual. I've got 56 into Master at Arms for that flat damage. 47 into Staff Expert because I do heavy attack a lot with my staff to recover Magicka. Since I am attacking fairly often, I tend to run low on Magicka occasionally, so I just want my heavy attacks to deal a little bit more damage in the off time of my abilities. 37 into Spell Erosion because that penetration is nice. 56 into Ellie Expert. 31 into Elfborn because I don't use I don't want to rely too much on crit damage for my damage, so I'd rather spend those more into Ellie Expert and Master at Arms and Staff Expert, just because of how prevalent Impen and Impreg is in Cyrodiil. And I've got 43 into Bless because that's just more healing done to me. A whopping 72 into Shadow Ward because my Sword and Board is a pretty important part of survival. 40 into Tumbling because, again, the stamina costs, lowering those stamina costs really helps with survivability, so that's 18%. Tenacity for those heavy attack sustain. 64 into Arcanist to keep my regen up. 23 into Warlord for the break free, and I only have 7 into Siphoner because Siphoner is a purgeable ability, so it's just one more thing for people to have to purge, because I've got Curse and the dot from Clench going, and I don't want those to be purged if possible. And there's also the dot from Dawnbreaker, but that's a little bit less often. I want to wrap this up by pointing out a few things. The first thing is that I never intended for this to be like a high-end build or anything. It was mostly just for fun, something that I did because I was kind of annoyed about getting Rage Whispers during Dark Brotherhood about my shields, and also I was annoyed about the whole 6-second shields thing during Dark Brotherhood, so I figured I would just scrap them all together. So basically what I did was I looked at the Argonian passives at the time, and I thought, what can I use to make Argonian MagSorc as good as it possibly can be? So over the next few months, through Shadows of the Hist and One Tamriel, I ended up coming across this setup through a lot of trial and error. I died a lot of times, but I stuck with it, which is extremely important if you ever want to try this out. If you want to try this out, you have to get used to it. It's a very unforgiving build. There's no room for error. If you make a mistake, you're gonna feel it almost immediately. You have to know what your weaknesses are. If you don't think you can win a fight, there's no shame in pulling out. But yeah, that's probably the most important thing, is to just keep on practicing if you do decide to try it out. The next thing that I want to point out is that the front bar isn't really static. Sometimes I change it around to fit certain situations. If I find that I'm fighting a lot of DKs one night, then I'll change my setup to be more beam focused rather than projectile focused. So if you do decide to try this out, don't be afraid to swap out different abilities. One setup that I particularly liked was replacing Clench for Crushing Shock, and Tomb for Rune, and Dawnbreaker for Soul Assault. I put a video up about that. That was the first setup that I used for Murkmire, and that turned out pretty well. So if things are going sour for my primary setup, I usually swap to that, just to make my life a little bit easier against, anything that might be countering my projectiles. The last thing that I want to point out is the fact that I have no idea how this build works on something other than Argonian. I've only used this on Argonian. One of my friends tried using it on a Breton. It didn't work out so well. The health pool was too small. So to make up for it, they tried wearing heavy armor, then their regen got messed up, and so yeah, if you do try this, I highly recommend trying it on Argonian, if you have a spare Argonian MagSorc laying around. But other than that, I have a few clips showing. They're not like wombo combo clips or anything. They're just showing how I use the build, how I do the rotation, how I survive and then die in high pressure situations. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy.